Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you have chosen to spend a little bit of your valuable time with me as I talk about going to my first punk show in a couple of years. This concert was in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, of all places, and it featured three bands. The two openers I was not at all familiar with. The headlining band, Lagwagon, was the one I was really there to see, but I did enjoy the whole show. So it started off with a band called Rules, which, according to my research, are a local band from Hamilton, Ontario, and weirdly enough, two of their members are from other bands that I am already familiar with. So their bass player apparently is from The Creepshow, who are a psychobilly band from Hamilton who I've seen in concert a couple of times, and their guitarist is from the band Walk Off the Earth, of all things. I don't know if you've ever seen any of their stuff, but if you haven't, definitely look up Walk Off the Earth on YouTube. Their music, it's definitely not punk rock. It's more sort of a cappella mostly, but also very interesting. And it's certainly the last person I would expect to be in kind of a hardcore punk band would be from Walk Off the Earth. But there you go. They were a local band and they were excellent. Now, I do have to admit that the older I get, the more and more I feel sort of alienated from the punk scene. Way back a quarter of a century ago, when I first started to go to punk shows, as a person who's always been sort of a loner and an outcast and who never really fit in social circles, when I discovered the punk scene, I really felt like I found my place, my tribe. These punks and misfits were totally the sort of people that I felt like I fit in with, and so punk shows always felt like kind of home to me. But now I go out to shows and I'm an old sober guy. I don't drink because of my Crohn's disease, and I'm just in this room crowded with drunk people half my age, and it just is not the same environment. I'm there again as a non-drinker, as an old guy, and as somebody who has pretty significant social anxiety due to PTSD. It's not the most comfortable environment as it once was for me. So I just kind of have to stand there and try to ignore everyone around me and just enjoy the music. So the band Rules was fun. We only caught their last few songs when we kind of arrived partway through their set. And then after their set was over, all of a sudden I found people handing me free stuff. This one guy came up to me and said, "Hey, I want you to check out my band's CD," and he hands me a CD, and I actually had to listen to it on the way home, and it was, sure enough, a full album of this I guess local punk band. And then another guy came up to me and he hands me this album that's meant to be played on a record player, although it's kind of like it looked like a miniature record, but it was floppy, but it was meant to be played on a record player. Fortunately, I was there with one of the greatest people in the universe, and he owns a record player even though I don't, so I gave that to him. And it was just weird having these people coming up to me and giving me this free music. I think the record was a mix of bands, probably from a little independent record label, I assume. I'm not exactly sure. But then I also ended up with a couple of picks that had been thrown out into the crowd as well. So, you know, coming home with a pocket full of CDs, records, and guitar picks wasn't too bad. And then the next band up was a band from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma called Red City Radio. I would describe Red City Radio as being kind of a slower punk band. They're not the type of music that I would just put on and listen to at home, but they were really fun to see live. They definitely were great performers. The lead singer was also a lead guitarist, and I really enjoyed watching him do his thing on the guitar. He was quite good. But as if to prove my point about being around a bunch of young drunk people, partway through their set, all of a sudden the crowd that's standing right in front of me just parts, and there's two guys, each with their arm around the back of the other guy's head, just pummeling each other. And I'm like, oh, what the heck's going on here? Just the fight's broken out in the middle of the set. And I love fighting. I mean, the only sport I watch really is the UFC and mixed martial arts. And I myself have really enjoyed in the past throwing some fists in basement fights and backyard fights and that sort of thing. But punk shows are not the place for that kind of activity. Punk shows are amazingly friendly. Despite the violence of the mosh pits and the whole scene, it's a really surprisingly friendly and welcoming environment, and that's what's always kind of drawn me to this scene, is this sense of camaraderie and friendship that I have at the punk shows. And so fighting just is a big no-no for me. And in the past, when this has happened at a punk show, I've actually stepped between two guys who were getting ready to throw down and sort of separated them and said, no, this isn't the place for that. And so when these two guys were all of a sudden throwing fists right in front of me, I was looking for a way to kind of get in between them and separate them, but like I said, they were like attached to each other, with like literally standing head to head, just pummeling each other in the face. And I'm looking at them going, I'm not sure how to get in between them. But it was also happened basically not too far from the stage, so the security were right there within seconds anyways and broke them apart. And it looks like only one of them was taken away by security for some reason, but that was a bummer. But then I realized, oh yeah, I'm in Hamilton. Of course, this is what's happening in Hamilton. But anyhow, Red City Radio put on a great set. They were a lot of fun to see. And then in between, during sound check for the headlining band, Lagwagon, they were playing some music over the PA system, and at one point, the NoFX song Linoleum came on the PA, and before you knew it, the entire crowd was singing along to Linoleum. So that was kind of a fun moment in between bands. And then the band that I was there to see, Lagwagon, came on. And I'm just so grateful that these bands came from the US at a time like this when traveling is not easy. There are not very many US based bands coming to Canada at the moment. Trust me, I've been looking for concerts to go to and there just hasn't been really much happening. So the fact that they came from the US was something really special. And then Lagwagon have just been kind of one of my favorite bands going all the way back to the 90s. So I was excited to see them regardless. And I mean, what can you say about a bunch of guys in their 50s who are still rocking out on stage? Yeah, they're old and they're still killing it. On this tour, Lagwagon are apparently playing through 2 of their albums, and every other concert they're playing through one album, then the next concert they'll play through the second album, and then the next concert they'll go back to the first one. So the one we saw them play was called Double Platinum, which has a few songs that I was quite familiar with from listening to them in the past. The only CD I actually have ever owned from Lagwagon is their first one called Duh. But Double Platinum is quite a good album as well. Normally, I'd be spending some time in the mosh pit and working out a bit of angst and energy there, but due to COVID and mask restrictions, usually when I'm in a mosh pit, I'm just dying for oxygen and trying not to either puke or pass out the entire time. So I didn't really fancy getting in there with a mask on and trying to exert that amount of energy with my face covered. I didn't actually know if they would allow people in the pit because of COVID, but apparently there weren't any issues with that. Although, I mean, most people at the show weren't wearing masks because they were drinking, so they were standing there with drinks and didn't have their masks on, and so a lot of the people in the pit just didn't bother to wear masks either. So I also wasn't feeling super comfortable about direct physical contact with all these maskless people, although I am double vaccinated and I myself was wearing a mask, so I wasn't feeling too at risk by any means. But it's just a situation that I didn't necessarily want to involve myself with. In the future, if the world ever gets back to some semblance of normalcy, maybe I'll get back to a pit again. Because that's where I do feel at home still at a punk show. When I'm in a pit and I'm in the midst of the action, then I don't necessarily worry as much about the environment, all these people around me, and I just kind of get really into the moment and enjoy the experience. It's not quite the same when you're just standing there watching the show, but on the other hand, when you are standing there watching, you can soak in the music and the performance a lot more than if you're just trying not to die in the middle of a mosh pit. So there is definitely pros and cons to both, although I prefer the more hands-on involvement of being in a mosh pit at a punk show. So all in all, it was just really great to get back out to a punk show after a couple of years of being away from them. All three bands were really great. It was just especially awesome to see Lagwagon again. And the fact that my favorite bands from the 90s like Rancid and The Offspring and Pennywise and Social Distortion and Rise Against and all these bands are still going after all these years, it's really quite amazing. But it's also really awesome. But what about you? What kind of music have you been listening to lately? Are there any artists or songs in particular that have stuck out to you in recent months? While I am a bit of a one-trick pony, as it were, with the punk rock, that's definitely where my heart and soul is. I do appreciate music in general, for the most part, and I'd be interested in hearing what's been in your ears lately and what you've been listening to, so please do let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you could consider doing one of the following things, I would appreciate it. Maybe give me a like. Largely with people half my age who crowded with people. So rules were, and in the past when that's happened I didn't know if they would actually, and Social Distortion